Artificial intelligence is a term that most of us are familiar with, but what are the practical implementations for artificial intelligence, and what are we seeing the use cases trending in? Well, Chan Yu Im from Channel News Asia will be moderating the fireside chat with Dr. Kai Fuli, chairman of Sinovation Ventures, in order to find out about key developments in today's artificial intelligence industry. Well, I'll now pass the time over to Yu Im and Dr. Lee.
All right. Hello, I'm Chan Yu Im, editor and presenter at Channel News Asia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, the focus of today's session is the new AI imperative from scientific discovery to the age of implementation, which is apparently where we are at right now. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Kai Fuli. He is chairman of Sinovation Ventures. It's a venture capital firm that invests in AI technology. And Dr. Lee is one of the world's most respected leaders in the field of artificial intelligence, and he is one of the founders as well. So Dr. Lee, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's have a look at 2020 in retrospect. It's been nearly a year since whispers that something might be amiss began to emerge from Wuhan, and now we're living in a vastly different world. Everyone is getting used to coping with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our behavior has changed as well. So a lot of us work from home, we play, we study, we do everything. It's all digital. And all this internet activity is feeding into AI machines, which means that they're learning, they're getting smarter, they're getting quicker. You've already said that in the past 2 to 3 years, AI implementation and adoption has vastly bolted ahead. So if we use that as a reference, how would the gains in 2020 alone compare, Dr. Lee?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me to the conference. AI is a technology that relies almost exclusively on data. Having a large amount of data is paramount to having a successful AI implementation. And the data needs to be large in quantity, structured, labeled, connected to some business result. So it's traditionally, internet has been the space in which this kind of data has been available, whether it's Facebook trying to maximize user minutes or Amazon trying to figure out what other products to suggest that you buy. AI is the technology that's used to target you for the specific items to maximize its business result. So the natural progression would have been for AI to be adopted in other businesses with large amounts of data, such as fintech, what we're talking about here, and also government, retail, manufacturing. And then AI is also gaining quickly on the ability to understand speech and images and vision, and then, of course, autonomous vehicles and robots. So that's kind of the technology roadmap. What COVID has done is really accelerated the digitization. As we know, our old workflow, right, going to work is all that analog. It's not digitized. It's not stored. It's not analyzed. You know, it's us walking around in the real world. Our meetings are not always recorded. But I think COVID having to need to create a work environment that allows for remote workers and working at home, it has really streamlined and digitized the work. Similarly, meetings such as this one has also become digitized. So this rapid stage of online and digitization creates the data infrastructure, I think, for a much faster adoption of AI. That means the analysis of work streams. That means figuring out what types of work might be outsourced and doable by AI. It also means potentially AI can be used to be a part of these meetings, such as taking notes, such as searching notes. So everything you ever say, you now have to be accountable for. And also AI can become a virtual customer service agent, because you could be looking at me like you do now, but I could be a robot responding to your customer service queries or trying to make sales. And the list goes on. And then this will disrupt and change not just work, business, conferences, meetings, but also, of course, entertainment, education. So this will have a large spillover effect. The other aspect where AI has a big impact is in the robotics, because the need to socially distance in warehouses, in factories, the adoption of robots, especially in China, has been very, very rapid. And that includes for moving items in factories and warehouses, for picking, and also for visual inspection, as well as for some assembly. That's a little bit tougher. But that is now also spilling over into other commercial use. In many restaurants now in China, it is not a waiter who brings the food, but a robot. The robot is not humanoid, it's more like a tray that knows how to take the food to each table, where the person who ordered the food takes it off as a means of minimizing contact. So I think really AI is blossoming everywhere. And of course, healthcare is a final area that we all know is AI is being used for contact tracing. AI will be used in the future for predicting pandemic. AI is being used to assist in the vaccine and drug discovery process. So I believe the pandemic has an unintended consequence of dramatically accelerating the adoption of AI.
Dr. Lee, in a very short period of time amid COVID, many people have lost their jobs, and many companies have also had to digitize in order to survive. So here in Singapore, for example, government policy is to help firms to retain jobs, to keep workers. There's also a lot of help for businesses to embark on their digital transformation journey and, of course, train their workforce in tandem as well. Still, though, Dr. Lee, it remains a challenge for some traditional businesses who seem afraid or unwilling to digitize because they just don't understand the nuts and bolts of it. So from a survival of the fittest point of view, what is the cost of not going digital for businesses?
Well, it's very similar to not embracing the internet. In the beginning, people might think they can continue to do what they do. Other people are not doing it. But two things will happen. One is for some businesses, for some industries, there will be companies that tries to disrupt existing players. For example, online AI-based insurance or loan compared to traditional ways of doing these things. That will be one big threat and challenge. That will have companies that have a brand new way of doing everything online using AI. So it has no cannibalization, no baggage, and much lower cost structure. And that will seriously threaten companies that don't embrace AI and technology. The other is traditional companies. Some will embrace AI first and will gain either a margin advantage or a cost advantage. And that will be the other form that will provide a front and back squeeze on the companies that are slow to embrace AI. I'm not saying every company must embrace AI, but companies that have a lot of data and the data connects to a business result and it has either competitors in the same market or potential digital disruptors. These are going to be the first set of companies, I think, that will face these challenges. And if you look at the companies that were too slow to embrace the internet, most of them are out of business. And AI is really the next big disruptor, platform level after the internet. So please heed the advice that you really need to consider this, embrace it, adopt it early, be an early adopter so that you won't be squeezed in both ways.
And Dr. Lee, you said that the fintech sector is perfectly suited to AI, or that AI is perfectly designed for fintech. Could you explain this a little bit? And how can governments and regulators encourage entities in this space to adopt more AI technology?
Certainly. The way AI works is you take a large amount of data, and then you use that data based on actual outcomes to make smart decisions. So, for example, you can take a look at a lot of people who borrowed money and try to teach an AI system to determine what kind of a person with what kind of a background and data is likely to default versus repay. Similarly, with credit card, detect what kind of a particular usage pattern and the user background is likely to be fraudulent versus non-fraudulent. All the companies you invest in, AI can be used to alert issues and trigger potential problems, but also you can teach an AI system to find inefficiencies and in the marketplace and find companies that will provide higher returns. So data science is often the first step to help humans gain the insight, but then later AI is a much better way to make decisions because AI can take into account so many more variables. When people tend to look at if then else as ways of reasons to make an investment or to approve or disapprove a loan. AI can take into consideration many peripheral elements. So it's a much better informed, higher accuracy compared to the human. And also AI can potentially target each person with something different so that it can look at, for some people, it might look at certain features about giving a loan. For other people, it might look at other features. So it's not a standard one size fit all. So these are the reasons why fintech is why AI is a good fit for financial industries, because there's a lot of data and there are certain results. You always know at the end of the day if someone returned a loan or not, if the credit card use was fraudulent or not, if an investment made money or lost money. And these become very accurate grand truth to label the data so as to help AI learn to separate the two types of outcomes. So financial data is also all virtual, all human created, as opposed to if you want to automate an assembly line, you got to find ways to fit in the robot and have it work with people and all these complex things. If you want to fit it into manufacturing, you have to figure out how it fits in the supply chain, how the packaging is done. It's a lot of physical things. Financial is all virtual. So in that sense, it's very similar to the internet. So if you look at how much AI has disrupted and improved and helped internet giants make so much more money, that same opportunity exists in fintech.
And Dr. Lee, let's turn to the topic of responsible AI. So the current discussion is very much focused on rules and regulations when it comes to safeguarding data, issues of privacy, and of course, a lot of governments are taking this very seriously. But where do you see perhaps a tug of war happening between regulation and allowing innovation to flourish in the industry?
Right. I believe regulation is certainly needed because AI is powerful, is a very powerful tool. Used by the good guys, it can create value. Used by the bad guys, they can do bad things with it as well. And also, AI is a new technology. As with any new technology, the first applications are inevitably going to find unanticipated problems. And that's why we see a lot of concerns about use of AI in the areas of privacy issues, bias, fairness, and explainability, and security. So these are some of the things that really frighten people, and rightfully, understandably so. I do think regulations are needed to protect users in the appropriate places. But I would also say equally important are using technologies to prevent wrongful technology use. For example, a lot of the bias fairness problems, like AI that has chosen to interview fewer women because they didn't have enough women in their databases, or not recognizing African Americans because not having enough databases. I would say that to reduce such cases of bias and unfairness, one could build tools that can detect data that's insufficient or data that is likely to lead to bias and alert the programmer, or even disallow the programmer from building a program on such biased data. But also training the engineers to realize their responsibility is not just to write a piece of code, but the code will be used to interview people. So you'll be potentially writing software that will create unfair situations. And then if you extend that to autonomous vehicles, which could hit people, autonomous diagnosis engines that could give the wrong diagnosis, the responsibility on AI engineers is huge. So I think educating people to understand the responsibility so that they take it seriously, provide good tools, have technologies for detecting, avoiding, fixing, are also part of the repertoire of things we need to do, in addition to the regulations.
Dr. Lee, do you think there'll be one day a global standard for the ethical use of AI, or do you think rules will have to be tailored by country and by culture?
I think it will have to be different by country because I don't think initially these will be AI laws or even data laws. They will basically be built on existing laws, right? People who use AI for fraudulent use will be punished by the existing laws about around fraud. People who basically steal data or sell data that doesn't belong to you will be basically punished the same way as people who steal cars and steal other physical properties and give it to people. People who break into other people's AI and alter systems and alter outcomes will be punished the way that hackers who break into systems and damage computer equipment and hurt user experience. So I think existing laws will first be used and applied for the misuse of AI to cause damage to other people. And as we all know, the way one punishes IP or privacy or fraud are different country to country. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all, but there are similar underlying value. But I think the actual punishment and the enforcement will be different country to country.
And moving ahead as AI seeps into our everyday lives, do you think the issue of privacy will become less and less of a concern as more people get used to how it functions and they get to know it better, they understand it?
I believe this will likely evolve. I think right now, in some of the developing countries, people are enjoying the convenience so much, they're being less worried about privacy. I think that's an issue. Greater awareness is needed and greater protection by the governments for the relatively less experienced and naive users. But also, I think in some of the developed countries, a few egregious efforts, events and news, such as the Cambridge Analytica news, I think is perhaps raising people's alarm too much. So much so that people are proposing very extreme countermeasures that I think will end up backfiring. Yes, Facebook and Cambridge Analytica caused some problems, but it's probably not a solution to break up Facebook into multiple companies. There should be better ways about punishing basically data exchange and sell of data without consent. There should be ways to deal with that as opposed to jumping to the extreme. But I think people will over time grapple with and figure out ways where government can protect the most egregious types of infringement. I also think there will be people who will feel there's so much convenience, they're willing to give away some privacy. But I think it's important to realize, first, it may be different, a little bit different country to country. Second, a certain level of consumer understanding and advocacy is needed. And thirdly, even within one country, there will be people who view privacy as something that is something that's extremely important and highest priority and not willing to compromise. But there will be also other people who will say, hey, look, we live in a world where there's not going to be too much privacy at the end of the day, and the convenience we get is good enough as long as the laws are protecting us from the most egregious uses. So the end user needs to have some options about really going to the extreme to protect privacy, or being able to exchange to some extent privacy or data for convenience and security and other benefits.
And Dr. Lee, earlier you mentioned the role of research and the developers and all of this, and there are a lot of ethical challenges that remain. So there's fairness, there's explainability, data provenance, and robustness as well. How is this being addressed in the AI community at the moment? Should developers be bearing the responsibility of the products or how the product is used by the client? Or is the attitude more, I create this and it's really not up to me how it's used or how the data is used or how the algorithms are used?
The AI community have gathered together and come up with a number of basically rules of engagement and AI ethics policies. Some companies, Google, Microsoft, and others have come up with some. Also, some of the AI community that have formed. I'm a part of the World Economic Forum AI Council, and we are developing a certain set of guidelines, and there are other entities such as Partnership for AI that are doing that. So the AI community is doing some of this. And I think some governments are also coming up with different laws that protect the data and that punish people who break such laws. And China has had pretty strong laws about companies selling data without consent to another company. They're actually very significant punishment. Europe has developed GDPR. I think at the end of the day, it's really the first time we're seeing huge benefit from AI, but also large challenges. So I think we have to allow for different organizations, different companies, and different governments to try different rules and regulations and really watch and study and survey what's going on so that each country and each company can develop the best laws and the best products and the internal practices that protect the users and give users some degree of choice.
And Dr. Lee, despite the promise of vaccines, there's still a lot of uncertainty and disruption that's going to be carried over into 2021. So let's try to crystal ball this a little bit. As AI increasingly generates real economic value through its application across many industries, especially traditional ones, where do you predict we'll see inroads and breakthroughs in the next 6, 12, or maybe 18 months?
I think in the short term, the Western world is beginning to see the benefit that China has enjoyed for some time about the use of mobile payment and digital currency. For many years, I've had friends in US and Europe not fully understand what the big deal is with Alipay and WeChat Pay. I think the pandemic actually very interestingly, because people are trying not to pass on credit cards to each other for the fear of getting the virus. So people have moved to the digital payment. And it's kind of a strange reason that leads to the same outcome. So we're now seeing in the US products like Square's Cash App and PayPal really growing in popularity. And then they're now offering, so once you have a digital wallet, I think you will begin to see the benefits are tremendous because you can use that for investment, for loans, for insurance, and that will make new kinds of entrepreneurial efforts a lot easier. We're seeing in China, the entire shopping experience is now different because of digital payment. The entire online to offline, the food delivery has completely changed. The Chinese people have completely changed the way that we eat. So I think these dividends that China has been enjoying, US and Europe will soon enjoy also because of the pervasiveness and the inevitability for digital payment to become the #1 payment method, much higher, much better than cash, and also better than credit card. And the spillover effects will be quite significant because in China now, I think we're moving kind of to the next level. We're seeing the online behavior and the digital payment really changing the future of online retail, online education, and online entertainment. New forms are coming out, and online e-commerce. Commerce is now quite a bit different. We're seeing, a reinvention of TV shopping, now recast as live-streamed e-commerce shows. It might sound kind of unusual, but imagine anything you buy, you can just click on the phone. Then the most wonderful way to sell a product or browse is to have celebrities or KOLs that have a lot of trusted followers, and then they would then sell products that they believe themselves and convince their followers to buy. And then when they became big stars, they can build their own brand. So over time, the e-commerce we're seeing in China, the product concept, product development, product manufacturing, sales, marketing, channels, KOL, celebrities, spokesperson, all become streamlined online and digital. There are even products that were first marketed and then developed. A beverage in China was tested first to see what kind of packaging color, name, sugarless content versus milk versus what's in it, who should you sell it to, who's a better KOL, to be a spokesperson. When they decide all that, they come back and say, okay, let's design the drink because now we know this drink will sell well. So that ability to connect all of these parts of product development all the way to sales dramatically shortens the product cycle and reduces the likelihood of failure. And I think this will take us to new heights. And the very important foundation is digital payment. And China has been building on this for the last 6 or 7 years. And I think we're seeing US really starting to catch on as well.
All right, Dr. Lee, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for your insights. A real pleasure speaking with you. And that was Dr. Kai Fuli, Chairman of Sinovation Ventures. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee and Yu-Im, for the engaging conversation around artificial intelligence. Now, AI applications, that's what the topic has been about. It is a hot topic, especially for financial services. But one thing is for sure, AI is rapidly reshaping the business landscape of the financial industry. All kinds of digital assistants and apps will continue to perfect themselves thanks to cognitive computing. Now, this will make managing personal finances exponentially easier since the smart machines will be able to plan and execute short and long-term tasks from paying bills to preparing tax filings. We can also expect to see better customer care that uses sophisticated self-help virtual reality systems.